Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here. Welcome to Weiss Advice powered by BeatStars.com. In the last video, we discussed what an EQ is and how to use it. In this video, I'm going to show you why we use an EQ. We're going to take a production that's good, we're going to use some EQ, and we're going to make it really pop and shine. You're going to be able to take these ideas, apply them to your own beats, and it's going to get them from 95% all the way up to 100. All right, before I get started here, I have to give a special shout out to Tuna Beats for providing the beat that I am using to demonstrate these ideas. You can find him at BeatStars.com/Tuna Beats. All right, let's get started. So why do we use an EQ? Well, there's a number of reasons. For one, we might simply just be trying to emphasize a certain tone or texture in an element. Or we might be trying to get one element out of the way of another so that that other element can be heard more clearly. Or perhaps we're just trying to enhance or diminish an element's presence in a certain frequency range. Or lastly, we might be using EQ to create some kind of special, unique, transformative effect. And I'm going to demonstrate all of those ideas in this video. Let's get started. Now, I'm going to begin by saying anytime we are making mixing decisions, we always need to ask ourselves the most pivotal question, which is, what is the musical intention of the song? You see, a lot of people mistake mixing for a scientific process when truly it's actually an artistic process. So when I hear that particular little segment, I know in my mind it's supposed to sound a little dirty and grungy, kind of creepy, a little murky, a little weird. And so when I make my EQ decisions, I know that I'm going to want to bring that out. I'm going to start with that bass. To me, there's something very, very interesting going on with that bass, and I'm going to solo it up so that we can really hear it. Now, you might not notice it first, but if you listen very, very carefully, there's actually some really interesting overtones that are showing up, meaning things that are above the fundamental core of the sound that are there, but kind of subdued and in the background. There's sort of this grungy, grimy kind of a tone that's sort of in the mid-range, and then there's something that sounds almost like a papery, crackly noise way up in the top that's just pushed super low. Didn't hear it? Well, you're about to, because I'm going to grab an EQ and I'm going to use it to enhance a texture that's living in the top end. So I'm going to grab a high shelf because this is a high noise, and I'm going to start it around the upper mid-range at about 1K, and I'm going to start pushing these tones way up. Notice how when I emphasize these top tones, I'm getting this crackly, almost fireplace kind of a sound. I really, really like that. Now, in the process of doing that, I'm also bringing up some of those nosier overtones. I'm going to see if I can attenuate those. Now without the EQ, with. Now, in a lot of records, we would probably want to get rid of those overtones because they might not musically be necessary, but here, because we have this big open space and it's supposed to sound kind of creepy and weird, I like having that weird crunchy noise in the background being more present. Let's listen to it in context now. Without it, with. To me, that adds character and personality that wasn't there to begin with, and I really like it. Now, similarly, we might have something that we want to get rid of. For example, this kick in this particular area It's really pretty knocky, meaning there's this very forward sound to it. Because everything is so filtered and lo-fi and grungy and dark, I don't know if I necessarily want the kick to have that forward knocky quality. If this was something that was more in an upbeat section or something that demanded a little bit more punch and a little less vibe, I would absolutely want to have that knock. But for this section, to me it's supposed to feel creepy and subdued, so I'm going to try and get that same feel out of the kick. So that's the knock sound, right? It almost sounds like somebody knocking on a door. That's what I'm going to want to get rid of. Now, what am I really listening for? I'm reducing that knocky tone, and in doing so, I'm making the kick feel like it belongs more with the record. So listen to how the kick starts to gel in an emotional way. As weird as that is to say, that's what we're really doing here. Before. After. So by getting rid of this inappropriate tone, we can now make the kick feel like it belongs as part of the song, rather than just simply a kick that's been programmed on top of the music. Let's hop to the chorus section of this production and check out what it sounds like. So it's important to point out a couple of things that are really essential here. The first is that based on the arrangement alone, we do not have a lot of clashing. This is a really well thought arrangement. It's very open and everything is kind of living where it needs to. So our EQ tweaks are not going to be major ones. We don't have to transform anything to a huge extent in order to get things to work. However, there is a little bit of something going on called masking. Masking is when one element covers up another or part of another. And we have that happening between the bass and our lead vocal chop. I'm going to solo those up right now. Let's start with the vocal chop. Now I'm going to bring in the bass. The bass is making the vocal chop feel just a little bit smaller. Now, because they're not playing at exactly the same time, this isn't major, but it is something that I'm noticing and something that I'm going to want to fix. The vocal chop is really the main instrument here. It's the personality of this record, and so I don't want anything to really step on it too much. So we're going to make a couple of small adjustments to the bass in order to give it a little bit of room and allow the vocal chop to stay sounding really big. I'm going to grab my parametric EQ2. So this is the region that's sort of getting covered up, that primary tone that's in the vocal chop, which is living right around the low mids, somewhere around 260 to 300. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attenuate just a little bit of that out of the way, and I'm going to do it in real time as I listen to both, and I'm going to find that sweet spot where the bass still feels full and powerful, but the vocal chop is coming through really clearly. That sounds right to me. So without, with. Now I'm going to go into the vocal chop here, and I'm going to make a couple of little adjustments because I want it to be a little bit more present. There we go. So now, by making these two moves, I've unmasked the vocal chop from the bass, and I've also highlighted a little bit of the bass's texture, making it much clearer. Here's without our EQs. Here's with. Now let's bring in our entire arrangement. By taking out some of those tones from the bass, I feel like we've lost a little bit of its impact. However, there's another essential frequency region where that bass has some impact, and that's in its primary bass range. So I'm going to pull up some of those bass tones so that I can make the bass a little bit more present as well. Now let's hop over to this bell sound. Just to get a little bit more clarity out of everything, if we solo this bell, we'll notice that there's some excess low end that's hanging out there. On its own, this sounds fine, but when we're in the context of everything playing at the same time, the truth is we really don't need that, and all it's doing is just dirtying up the low end. So in order to unmask the low end just a little bit more and gain a little bit more clarity, I'm going to grab an EQ, and I'm going to put on a high pass. Now, if I listen to this in solo, I can eliminate those low tones and find a sweet spot where we still have the body and attack of the bell itself without having any of the extra low end drone. Now, if I bypass my IQ, and bring it back in, let's listen one more time. You'll notice that there's actually a lot more bass in this bell than we first realized. Now, you might be thinking, that seems like an awful lot to cut out, but let's listen in the context of the overall mix. With a couple quick adjustments, we don't really miss any of the bass from the bell. I'll bypass the EQ and then bring it back in. With. I almost don't even really notice it, except for just for whatever reason, the low end seems a little bit clearer. Otherwise, I don't feel like we've lost anything. So that's how we can use an EQ to provide more clarity, less mud, and to unmask one element from another. Now, I have one other thing to say on the subject of frequency masking and achieving clarity, and that's that sometimes it's not really worth the trade-offs, and it's important to be decisive about what our intentions are and what we're trying to do. So I'm going to play this section of the chorus, and I want you to focus on the piano. Now, in the mid-range of the piano, if we start taking out some 500 Hz, we're going to really unmask all of the other elements that are in this arrangement. Notice how everything becomes very, very clear as soon as I put in this dip around 500 Hz. Watch what happens if I start boosting. It immediately starts covering things up. So I know that if we want to unmask some sounds, that a little bit of a cut here would definitely do the trick. However, by doing that, I feel like we lose a lot of the personality and a lot of the energy of the record, and we have to be really careful and really thoughtful about doing anything that might take away from the vibe. Personally, I think it's supposed to sound a little spooky, a little weird, and a little imperfect, so I might even consider doing a little bit of a boost here and actually masking some of these elements on purpose, which is very counterintuitive and not something that a lot of people discuss in tutorials, but it's definitely a little gem that I suggest taking with you. Perfect is not always right. I like it. Just a little bit of a dab-a-do-ya, but a little bit of a boost right there just brings out a little bit of the energy and creepiness and aggressiveness that this part of the record needs. Now, I already touched on this a little bit, but a reason why we might use an EQ is to simply make an element more or less present in an area, regardless of what else might be around, and this is going to be really true of this bell sound. The bell sound could stand to be, in my opinion, a little bit shinier, a little bit more apparent in the treble range. It just feels like it fits. There's really not a lot of other sounds that are hanging out in the treble range except for a hi-hat, and so by boosting up the treble range here, it fills out the mix overall, and it also provides a little bit of extra texture and color where there wasn't any before. Now let's see if we can really find a sweet spot for this bell and where we want to hear it. Without. With. Now the bell really feels like it's living in its own space. I want to show one more example of making something more present at a specific frequency, but I want to show you a very interesting example of that. I've already taken the time to do a basic EQ contour on the kick here. That's what we're looking at in this screen right here. Now, I think it sounds really good. A lot of the time, samples are kind of designed to already sound the way that they're supposed to sound, but in this particular case, I want that drop to have a whole lot of weight and authority to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a peaking EQ, and this time I'm going to set the Q very narrow, and I'm going to see if I can find a very specific resonance that makes it feel like somebody putting down a really, really large foot every time that kick slaps. Now, you'll notice that a few of those different corners sounded really good. I really liked what happened at around 82. That's pretty great. There was something around 60 that I liked. For that really dark, heavy subtone, I like what we were getting at 48 hertz. Now, specifically speaking, I think that there's a lot of open room in the sub, and this is where I want to emphasize right here. This is just a subjective decision. All of those different points gave me something, but I think this is going to give me that sense of a really strong, bold authority and a really, really distinct sub hit. So I'm going to take this down a little bit. This is too much, but I'm going to certainly leave some of it up, pretty loud too, just so we have that really big sense of boom. So without this, with. Maybe a hair too much. Maybe I got a little too indulgent. Let's back it off just a bit. There we go. Nice. The last use I want to demonstrate is a really cool and really unique one, and it's something that can be used to bring a lot of spice and interest to your arrangement. So let's listen to this chorus section a couple bars through. Essentially, the chorus is divided into two parts. We have the first 4 bars here, which is a little bit more open, and then a couple more elements show up for the second 4 bars, making for a more energized chorus. However, there's no transition or bridge between these two, and I feel like it lacks a little excitement. So what I'm going to do is automate an EQ. Meaning I'm going to tell it to turn on at a very specific time, and that's going to be the couple of notes right before the chorus goes into the more energized part. Right here. So right before that second downbeat. I'm going to turn on my automation, and let's go take a look at what's going to happen here. I have this automation on the master channel, which means it's going to affect everything in the mix. And what I'm using is a bandpass EQ, which has been contoured a little bit by a couple other filters, a little bit of a bell boost and a little bit of a shelf. Now when we get to that point, the entire mix is going to have a unique effect on it. Just for that little turnaround section, it sounds almost like it's coming through an old radio. That's the effect that we're going for here. Something just to kind of spice up that transition point when we go up to the higher plane of elevation and energy that happens in the second half of the chorus. Now, just to add a little bit of energy to that, I'm going to find that little interesting huh that happens right on that downbeat. That sort of breathy sound. And I'm going to exaggerate that using some EQ. Specifically, I'm going to add a lot of top and bottom end because that's what we've removed in the pickup prior to it. So the effect here is that we're going to go from having very little top and very little bottom to having a lot more top and a lot more bottom for just a moment. And that's going to make for something that's heavy in contrast and really exciting. Now, it might sound a little strange out of context, but let's take it a bar earlier and see how it feels with the transition. Makes for a more exciting moment, and it sort of helps to elevate the entire record. So we can use EQ as a special effect, especially if we're getting into transitions or we want to change up the arrangement in some way, shape, or form. And we'll commonly hear this in a lot of hip-hop tunes when the verse suddenly becomes low-passed, and then that low-pass filter gradually lets up or lets up all of the sudden. So just to do a quick recap here, I'm going to take all of the EQs off and I'm going to play a couple bars of this chorus. Then I'm going to bring the EQs all back on and we're going to hear the difference. All right, here we go.